Hi, everyone. Dressed up like a SoundCloud rapper for Halloween. Foreigner here. God, it was a mouthful. I figured today's getup is appropriate for today's topic, which is about something that has become quite the national landmark for this fine progressive utopia of ours. You know, right along with the Swedish meatballs and the Swedish IKEA and the Swedish ABBA, you got the Swedish migrant shootings that we just had to have to prove the world how superior Swedes are to you. Because no matter who you are, you can never say you are as good as a Swedish person. That was the whole point of this experiment. And now here we are with one of the results. After all, I am not just a SoundCloud rapper, I am also the unofficial tour guide of Sweden. And so I figured I would take my responsibility as a global citizen and issue a well intentional warning to the world. But first of all, don't forget to support me on yada 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 Patreon plug here. Insert pictures.
Yeah.
In this video, we're going to start by covering what is happening, why it's happening, what our politicians want to do about it, and how the same thing will happen in your country if you don't consider us something to learn from rather than a utopia to take after. Over the past years, more and more international outlets have picked up on Sweden's massive problems and indirectly proven Trump to be ahead of his time. Just this year alone, The Guardian, Reuters, The Times, and several more made headlines about the same thing. Out of 22 European countries analyzed, Sweden is the only one where fatal shootings have increased significantly since 2000, turning this country from one of the lowest rates of gun violence to being the most dangerous country in Europe, all in less than a decade. This basically means that open borders and mass immigration from third world countries has led to more deaths and shootings in Sweden than guns have. Just looking at so-called fringe crime such as terrorism alone, since the refugee crisis in 2015, radicalized asylum seekers have murdered or injured over 1,000 people in terror attacks across Europe. A report showed shootings in Sweden tend to follow one another since they're gang-related and set off vengeance spirals across competing groups. This is described as social contagion, and these kinds of shootings have been moving out into the public more and more and more, claiming more and more civilian lives.
Put simply, the ghetto is moving outside of the ghetto. And that is when white Swedes start to panic. You know, the same people who've been talking about how much they love diversity all this time.
And of course, our media didn't care so long as their own kids weren't getting shot, and this didn't exist in their own neighborhood. So long as only migrant kids got shot, you would still be considered a racist in this country for saying that this is a big problem. Then the problem got so bad, now everyone is talking about it. Nice NIMBY culture, bro. Recently, Germany's biggest media outlet did us a huge favor and acknowledged issues that are swept under the carpet, declaring Sweden the most dangerous country in Europe, and they're doing this based off statistics. Sweden is 3 times above the EU average when it comes to deadly shootings, but it's 10 times more common for young men to be shot dead in Sweden than Germany. All of this still hasn't really sunk in amongst the people. The picture this German paper used here is of a very popular rapper called Einar. That's another thing that's new in Sweden, the gangster rap that's been cultivated in our apartheid ghettos created by the left, making more and more Swedish men suddenly become Uyghurs and speak with Arab slang, which I do have to admit is quite diverse. Well, it's a variety of sorts, you could say. At least. We didn't really have that before. However, it is very sad that this misguided 19-year-old artist got shot dead, point-blank range, just the other week. And our media blames it on climate change. This one isn't a joke. Let me read, quote, "I understand some want to blame this murder on hip-hop, but these are systemic problems. You have to find a root to what's going on. Young people all over the world are struggling to find their place. They've inherited a world that's crumbling and are trying to understand why we are destroying the planet. Hip-hop is not the problem. Hip-hop is a way to get out all the emotions. Hip-hop is the cry for help." End of quote. So you don't think the dumbest part of this video are my own takes. Lady, you're such an asshole. I'm blown away. I've never seen someone so shamelessly co-opt a murder and project their own completely unrelated opinions into it. It would almost be impressive if it wasn't the peak of clown world dark comedy. I mean, all you really have to do to disprove this notion is point to the fact that none of these rapper songs are about the climate. Oh yeah, and naturally Sweden's state media called German media sensationalist and brought in some talking piece to explain that it's not nuanced enough. This kind of journalism isn't nuanced. Another major Swedish outlet didn't exactly deny the statistics, but they made their entire focus about the Sweden image. Not the Sweden reality, but the perception of Sweden abroad. How that's the consequence of these shootings. Making it sound like an equally big problem that Americans might not idolize our country as the fact that many people have died. To be honest, this level of shallow, surface-level thinking is pretty much Swedish culture at this point. It's not just journalists. The people themselves act like this too. A very large portion of them. They care more about their reputation and how someone might perceive them and their country than about their fellow men. That is the guiding attitude throughout all avenues of social life in Sweden. I've been trying to wake people up for almost a decade with this channel, and it's pretty disgusting how little they care. So long as something doesn't happen to them personally, it's like it doesn't exist. So this is the situation. Open borders and the EU status quo makes it easy for criminals to smuggle guns across countries. If you're a member of an EU country, you can travel and resettle pretty freely across other member states. So there's not that many border checks and vetting going on. Instead, we have free movement. Just show your passport, which can easily be falsified, and be on your way. It's a playground. Because of this, Sweden has a lot of illegal guns being smuggled into the country, among other things, Soviet weapons from the war in former Yugoslavia. Yep, that's right. My ethnicity is complicit here. I mean, as long as we're talking about the problems with a bad immigration policy, I might as well be transparent. But the rule of thumb with us Balkanites is that we are hardworking and believe in education and assimilate well. In fact, Yugoslavians are one of the most well-assimilated migrant groups in Sweden. So the exception to that rule is our mafia, who are also hardworking, but in the worst way possible. Point is that criminals don't use legally procured registered firearms that can be traced back to them. In case that wasn't obvious, that would be kind of counterproductive for a criminal. It doesn't matter if guns are legal or not for a criminal. That's kind of the component of the criminal. The funny thing about this, then, is that I, as a Bosniak, have been preaching more deportations, more vetting, and tougher sentencing for years, while Swedish people have been telling me that's racist and I'm problematic. Even though it's immigrants as a whole that are gonna be catching a bad rep in the long run due to what 1% of us are doing, and the fact that Swedes are too afraid to deal with that 1%, just because, I don't know, you don't want to be perceived the wrong way by the global community. So the way that Swedish leftists want to solve this problem is to restrict gun ownership in this country even more and harass law-abiding Swedes with a hunting license that have old-timey rifles in their house, which are never used in any crime. Take a look at this thing. Do you understand how hard it would be to use this for a drive-by rather than a Uzi or an AK? I mean, this isn't even like a shotgun. You're gonna have to reload manually like a bayonet from 300 years ago. So, law-abiding working man hunters have nothing to do with this gun violence, yet they're the ones being targeted and facing even more restrictions over the criminal gangs that our politicians have been importing into the country for many, many years. Another thing Sweden is trying to do, our broad support amongst the public ruling left party, is now trying to make it illegal to publish names of convicted criminals in the media, which obviously would ruin the business model for alternative media and make people think there's no connection between open borders and crime. Can't publish names? You can't clarify ethnicity. This all touches upon the fundamental issue with multiculturalism and open borders in the long-term development of things. Namely, it's the perfect road to a more authoritarian society with less freedom for the individual. There are many ways in which normal people get to pay the price for what Islamists and Arab mafia are doing, which of course politicians are very happy about. They get to claim we need more surveillance and more power to the police to interrogate people and do house warrant searches, even when there's no palatable suspicion of crime. That is what both our left and our right have been suggesting recently to solve the problems with the consequences of their migration policy. They want to turn Sweden more and more into a surveillance society just to deal with the consequences of their utopian project. If there's anything to be learned from the lessons of my home country, it's that the only way you can establish a stable multiculturalism in the long term is through a dictatorship. That's why Yugoslavia fell soon as our dictator died. It was never meant to last. I guess now you know why China-friendly oligarch dementia patient Joe Biden, or Let's Go Brandon, is getting off to the border crisis he's created in America. The only time that old fart can get a boner is when millions of illegals are storming the country and undermining working class rights, all while his big business buddies get access to cheap labor and weakened unions. I did a video on this a while back. I'm sure you missed it, so check out my newsletter. YouTube notifications suck, and people magically get unsubscribed from my channel all the time. They go missing. Just like you can go missing in my home country if you piss off the wrong politician/mafia. Sweden not only bans guns and knives, but also mace and tasers. You're not allowed to carry anything in public that might resemble a weapon, and look where that got us.
Sweden has the most gun control in the world, and we also have the most shootings in our entire continent. So, are you noticing a connection there yet? Look what happens when you allow people to trade comfort for a brain, which allows them to make deep-seated connections to the many laws of the universe. Look at Sweden and look at Switzerland. Almost the same size population, smaller country surface, a lot more guns in the hands of civilians, sharpshooting is the national sport, people are allowed to own and carry firearms, and it's one of the safest places in not only Europe, but the world. Beautiful country. And yet, when people want to claim we need to ban guns, they look at crime rates in American states where guns have been banned, where laws are so strict that only criminals are the ones with guns because they're not following the law anyway, and therefore there is no equilibrium between good and evil. Obviously, that's when you have more crime. You don't have less crime by treating law-abiding citizens like criminals and hoping people aren't gonna notice the difference. Switzerland is a country with 8 million people, and a whopping 2 million of those own guns. Yet Switzerland hasn't had a mass shooting in 18 years. And isn't it interesting how Sweden, the country with the lowest poverty rates in Europe, also has the most problem with crime, violence, segregation, Islamism, rape, and shootings? Despite the fact that most people in poverty don't commit crimes, despite the fact that only 4% of people in Sweden can be considered materially poor, we're told that crime is about socio-economical factors. The only explanation the media gives us is socio-economical factors. Well, two things. Number one, if you think socioeconomical factors are so powerful, then why did you create poverty and anti-integration? Why did you invent 200 ghettos in just 2 decades? Why didn't you have low enough migration that people actually get a chance to integrate by being surrounded by Swedes, instead of stuffing every refugee in the same place at once? Namely, cheap neighborhoods with cheap housing that eventually turn into no-go zones. Number 2. Fuck you. Just fuck you and every lie that looks like you. What you have done with your open borders postmodern cult of tolerance, where you view us immigrants as pets and voting cattle, is to make sure more and more people are gonna become racist with time. The problem here is not immigration as a concept. The problem is allowing leftists and neocons to be in charge of immigration because they don't think of people as people. They think of them as pawns. Kind of a problem with collectivism, ignoring individuals, you know? Another huge contributing cause is Sweden's system in and of itself.
It's not the immigrants per se. As I mentioned, 99% of them don't commit any crimes whatsoever. So it's more what Swedish policies do to immigrants and how it brings out the worst in the exception to the rule, which makes out the weakest link of the chain. Sweden is so anti-progressive, they've made weed illegal. And police are investing more resources chasing stoners than trying to prosecute rapists. In fact, in some counties, almost half of rape reports are dropped without the perpetrator even being interrogated by police. So that should tell you something about our government's moral priorities. Naturally, this also means Sweden handed over a billion-dollar cannabis market to unassimilated criminal gangs that can go up to any teenager in their ghetto who isn't feeling any nice future prospects and just ask, "Hey bro, you want to earn $2,000 a week selling weed? It's all cash, you don't even have to tax it. What's up with that? You want to do this, bro?" Naturally, it becomes easy for them to recruit kids as young as 13. Because guess what? If you're under 18 in this country, you can even kill someone and only spend a year in prison. Perhaps things like that have helped crime grow rather than the guns themselves. But it's not just about weed. One Swedish rapper said people are actually shooting each other over Spotify money, which brings us to the Swedish artist I mentioned earlier. To make a long story short, a year ago Einar was kidnapped by 11 people from a gang. They put him in a leash, made him wear a dress and wig, beat him up, and took pictures of all of this, which were later uploaded to social media. It's also rumored they shoved a dildo up his butt to soil his reputation as a bad boy rapper. Later on, two of Sweden's most popular media-celebrated, award-nominated rappers were convicted for their participation in this kidnapping/robbery. And apparently they're connected to a network that police wanted Einar to testify against shortly before the murder took place. So how does this all tie together? Well, the past years, gangster rap has gotten immensely popular in Sweden, and the development of some kind of a ghetto culture has grown and made its way into the mainstream, being reflected in music as well as shows, movies, and other venues. Because the average Swede is an overly sheltered, spoiled middle-class white bread stereotype who finds anything foreign exotic because they think it makes them a cultured world citizen. Even songs about killing people. Trust me, it's not mainly immigrants listening to this music, because otherwise it wouldn't be a multi-million-dollar industry where literal criminals get music awards handed out by state media while also being investigated for having someone snuffed out. And just in case you're wondering, the article you're seeing on screen right here has nothing to do with the Einar case. This headline is referring to a different crime that celebrated Swedish award-winning rapper Yasin was suspected of. This means criminal gangs and rappers connected to them are cashing in millions in royalties from having their music played on our public service state media constantly, as well as the Swedish company Spotify. Einar himself earned 17 million SEK in just a year from his music, and it's speculated that music royalties are a bigger income for our gangs than Sweden's war on drugs. This rapper says he doesn't know anyone in the Swedish rap scene who isn't connected to crime. And the more famous and successful you get, the more your life is in danger. This makes it extremely hard for people to leave that criminal lifestyle, even with the best of intentions, even if they wanted to. Because competing criminals will do anything to test you and make you look weak in order to try and steal your income. Sometimes by taking you out completely. This also adds to the spiral of violence or social contagion that I mentioned earlier. A lot of it is about fear, and boy oh boy is crime a paranoid lifestyle. That's why those guys are always popping pills or snorting something. So if you're scared of getting murdered because you've heard rumors going around that someone is planning to snuff you out, you'd rather risk 4 years in juvie by killing them first than waiting around for those rumors to be proven as more than rumors. This means that, at least in the Swedish context, our rap culture is a way into crime more than it is a way out of crime. Adding, quote, The biggest thing you can be right now is a gangster with a mic. For example, you can't rap about shooting people if you're not actually doing it. It is incredibly important not to come off as fake. End of quote. As a rap fan, I find this quite fascinating because I'm not sure it's the same in America. Please leave a comment and tell me what you think and what country you live in. I also find it fascinating that Spotify is a politically correct ishhole who don't want Alex Jones, or Gavin McInnes, or even our Sweden Democrats podcast on there. No nationalist presence.
Because, their thoughts are so dangerous,
But paying out millions to people still involved in crime, making songs bragging about who they shot, is fine. That's that big corporation woke morality compass that's gonna save the world right there. Spotify also recently made a big effort to clean out so-called right-wing extreme music on their platform, but they have no problem funding criminals. In this mess, journalists and mainstream media also play a highly crucial role in empowering these criminal gangs and bringing them income. Swedish journalists invent cool names for gangs, such as the Death Patrol, which gangs then pick up and start using about themselves, rather than the code word that cops use to describe them in investigations. This helps build their brand and sell records, because it doesn't end there. Swedish journalists also produce and broadcast documentaries that are glorifying, paint them up as misunderstood victims, give them establishment awards, and make it seem like an exciting reality show rather than what it actually is. Compare this to the typical journalist sentiment, where more responsible outlets don't even want to name school shooters or terrorists because they know it can inspire copycat killings. Can you imagine if media outlets made up cool nicknames for school shooters and painted them up as victims of society and gave them primetime empathy slots on our public service state media? Just recently, I saw the most vulgar display yet. A criminal who partook in the most brutal gang rape in Swedish history, leaving the victim with entirely blood-stained underpants, got interviewed by Expressen. They mentioned nothing about this rape that he was convicted for, and instead talked about what an exciting upcoming gangster rapper he is. It is truly sick. You really can't explain this in any other way by pointing out the study showing that media and journalism is one of top 10 professions for psychopaths. Maybe that's why the two different groups attract to each other so much. The core problem here is brand building. Let me quote an article that explained it well. Music and crime are symbiotic with this new generation of rappers. Fame happens within both these arenas, and both are equally important to achieve the dominance that they're looking for. A conviction or a warrant for an arrest is good marketing that increases demand for the music. Firing guns on the set of a music video gives more views, and social media rumors about horror and brutality are crucial for their image to be perceived as real. Police even use rapper lyrics in their investigations, not to prove crime per se, but rather to make up a map of relationships to each other and the development of this criminal drama. End of quote. Put simply, the more talked about you are, the more feared you are, the more power you'll be able to exercise over other criminals. But also, the more you'll be able to impress Swedish middle-class kids as well as their parents with how real and gritty and exotic you are. And that's probably even more of a reason to legalize guns. Because the adult Swedish world and the establishment in this country have completely surrendered to this. They're playing into it. They're empowering criminals without a care in the world as long as you get exciting new music. And it's gonna go out over law-abiding people far more than you've already seen. So I guess this is a lesson to all the Americans and Canadians and everyone else watching. Please don't be like Sweden. Please don't be so mind-blowingly stupid you think banning guns is a good idea. All we've learned here from Sweden's decades-long multicultural experiment is that criminals are gonna use weapons regardless, and crime and antisocial behavior is a far more complex issue than what tools are available at your disposal. At the end of the day, people should have a right to defend themselves against the threat of tyrannical governments as much as tyrannical individuals, especially when they are paying some of the highest taxes in the world. Just look what we, as Swedish citizens, got in return for that.
That concludes today's Sweden report. Remember, I upload weekly, or try to, and feel free to donate so I can buy myself a bulletproof vest so I can keep making videos. Donation links are in the video description, and thank you for watching this far. I really appreciate everyone supporting this channel. It's been a tough few Shadowban years, and your support is more valuable than ever before. Share this video if you think my message is important, and I'll see you again next week.